This section is going to look at how we can save our time, but it comes with a warning. Shortcuts can lose you marks. And so this is only to be used when you are having time management issues. This is only to be used when you are entering that second sub-requirement with a lot less time than you had initially planned. This is not the go-to approach from the moment the clock strikes 60 minutes and your countdown begins. This should not be your plan A approach. This is your plan B approach when you are having time management issues. I've got quite a few tips to look at, and we're going to start with number one, which is to be as concise as possible. Now, our standard writing style suggests you put about 60 to 80 words, or on a Pearson VUE system, that's 1.5 to 2 lines, to get enough down to ensure that you get the full mark. But if you're really struggling, then write shorter paragraphs, perhaps 1 to 1.5 lines per point, or potentially even shorter. And it is possible to write enough in that space of time, but you have to be very, very exact and very specific in your language. And even if you don't get the full mark, you may get the half mark. And you might be able to write a couple of half marks to get a full mark more quickly than you might be able to write one full paragraph to give you 1 mark. So let's look at an example of how to cut a paragraph effectively. I'm going to start by giving you an example paragraph. So here we have: one consideration of the takeover proposal is the challenge of raising enough funds to make the purchase. At the year end, we had just $30 million of cash available within the business, much of which is needed to support ongoing operations. At least $100 million will be required, and given that the shareholders are not in a position to provide more funds, this would mean raising new debt finance, and gearing levels are high at 63%, making this challenging. So ultimately, what we are looking at here is the funds for a particular takeover. The funds required are significantly higher than the funds we have available, and we may not be able to raise additional financing from shareholders. And debt financing as well could be a problem because of the high gearing level. So how are we going to explain this far more concisely? There are a few rules to follow when being concise. And that is: 1, make a very, very quick, clear point. Explain that point and explain why it is relevant, and then just add a little bit of extra value. This could take the form of an example from a real life situation, perhaps a company that has done something similar in the real world. It could be applying it to the scenario, just adding a line in that applies it, ties it back to the scenario, and what potential problems they may have. So how are we going to write this clearly and concisely, making that point, explaining that point, and adding some extra value? Well, here is an attempt at writing that quickly. Funding the takeover will be a challenge. That is the point. That is the clear point here, that it's going to be a challenge. There's a $100 million requirement and just $30 million in the bank. When we're applying it to the financial statements within the case, if shareholders are unable to provide the funds, then debt will be required. And with a high gearing of 63%, this will be a challenge. And if I scroll back through the presentation, bear with me, we can see that that pretty much makes the same point. We've brought in the facts and figures, the $30 million of cash available, the $100 million requirement, the shareholders not being able to provide funds, and the high gearing level of 63%. That shorter paragraph essentially makes exactly the same point, but it does it in a significantly shorter amount of time. And it makes pretty much the same overriding point and may actually gain you as many marks in the exam, or at least will gain you some of the marks in the exam. And this can be written significantly more quickly than the original longer paragraph. So tip number 2, never look back at the pre-scene. Now, ideally on exam day, you shouldn't really be looking at the pre-scene too much anyway, because it's a lot of time. But if you are having time management issues, then never look back at the pre-scene. And before the exam, I suggest that you create and memorize a one-page fact sheet. And this is whether you think you're going to have time management issues or not, because if you memorize that one-page fact sheet, because you know you're not going to be able to memorize the entire pre-scene, you will have a list of key points you know you want to bring up, that you know you want to raise, and you will not have to look back at the pre-scene. You won't even have to look back to perhaps clarify exactly the point you are trying to make. You won't need to look back and think if there's anything else you want to bring up, because you know the key points you want to bring up. So whilst primarily for those who are having time management issues, I also think this is a very good way of maximizing the time available, even if you don't have time management issues, because ideally you shouldn't be looking back at the pre-scene. Tip number 3, don't revisit the unseen material. You should read the unseen no more than twice, initially to skim read and identify the requirements, and then again more in depth to create your plan. And once you have created your plan, trust in yourself, trust that your plan is good, and that if you just answer the question based on your plan, you'll write a reasonable answer. Don't second guess yourself and constantly go back looking at the unseen. Was there anything else I didn't mention? Was there anything else I should bring in here? Maybe I should just double check. Don't worry about doing that, because what you are going to get marked for is what is on the page. And spending time revisiting the unseen, second guessing yourself, is not going to gain you marks. So, in summary, trust yourself, make your plan, and trust your plan. Tip number 4, work at a very high pace. And a lot of students that struggle with time management are often quite slow. They often take a lot of time, a bit too relaxed, a bit too steady, and they work at simply just too slow a pace. And if you think that this might be you, then I have one thing to say. Speed up. Now, this may sound simple, and you may think to yourself, well, how can I speed up? I just work at the pace that I work. One thing you can do is to get yourself energized before the exam. Pump yourself up. Imagine a football player, a cricket player, a rugby player, etc. Before they start a match, they warm up, because when they warm up, they perform better during the game. And that's almost what you need to do. And it may sound silly, but go for a fast walk before your exam. Get your heartbeat racing, get your blood pumping. If you can take a bus to your exam center, or you can walk to the exam center, then walk to the exam center, because you will be more energized when you go in to sit your exam. And I actually have precedent for this. I had a student who had written 1,300 words more in their exam than they did in their mock exams. And they failed every single mock exam that they took, but they wrote a lot more in the actual exam. And they credited this with being the reason that they passed. And this student had also done this. They had got themselves energized. They'd got their heart rate pumping before going into the exam. And so, if, like this student here, you are getting poor grades in your mock exam, if you're not writing enough, then you may need to get energized even in your own home. Even if it just means pacing up and down the floor for a few minutes before you start your mock exam. You may be surprised at just how much difference it makes to your performance in those mock exams. Tip number 5 now, improve your typing speed. And CIMA say that on average, to write enough to pass the exam, you need to write about 20 words per minute. And this seems quite slow, because the average person types at around 40 words per minute. So the average person actually types twice as quickly as the recommended words per minute. But remember, this is not just a case of look through your work, see what you're going to write, then write at 20 words per minute. This is writing 20 words per minute every minute throughout the exam. But it does actually take into account your planning time, so you do not have to adjust that for your planning time. And if you worry about your typing speed, then take some speed tests online to find out what your typing speed is. If you take the test and you find out that your typing speed is 50 words per minute, that might give you a boost because you might think, oh, actually my typing speed is really good. I feel more confident that I'm going to write enough. If it isn't very good, then it will give you some tips on how to improve your typing speed. And I'm not saying you're going to go from 20 words per minute to 80 words per minute overnight. And I'm not saying you need to do that. That's not necessarily a great use of your time. But just spending an afternoon working on a few exercises could increase your words per minute by a couple of words per minute. Tip number 6, don't overthink things. Many students, what they do is they look at their plan and then they think a little more, they write a little more, then they look back again, they write a bit more, they look back again and write a bit more, and so on and so on. And as a result, they keep second guessing themselves. They keep overthinking and they don't get anything done. And that's not what you should be doing in this exam. That will not allow you to write a full script in time. You need to look at your plan. You then need to think and type as you are writing. And this is why we suggest that you plan into your answer book. So you don't need to look over. You don't need to take your focus away from what you are answering and then go back again. You're always in the answer box. The plan is always there and you're just turning your plan into your answer. And generally you should be typing at least 90% of the time. And some students often think that they worry about the quality, the overall feel of it. They worry about their grammar, etc. But remember that there are no negative markings in this exam and there are no dropped marks for spelling or grammar. As long as it is legible, as long as the examiner can see what you are trying to write, the point you are trying to make, you will get the mark for it. Tip number 7 is to use one-line bullet points. And I'll give you an example of how this works. But again, another warning here. This is your plan C. We had the plan A, which is to do the planning effectively and write in the appropriate writing style. At the plan B, which is to use these time-saving tips. This is the plan C. This is the absolute disaster where you have 5 minutes left and you've got very little done. So if you've got 5 minutes left, switch to using bullet points. Very short bullet points, no more than one line of the Pearson-VUE system, and make a very brief point and then just add a little bit more as to why it is relevant, why it is important to the company, perhaps a small bit of analysis. And the reason why we suggest this is because you'll be able to write a lot more of these in a very short space of time than you will be able to write full paragraphs. And you most likely won't get the full marks for them, but you may get some half marks. And you may be able to write far more of these in the 5 minutes than you will full paragraphs. So whilst you won't get as many marks for everything you write, you may be able to write more points and therefore actually gain more marks overall. So we've got an example here talking about communication tools. Managers are able to communicate performance feedback issues and business rate information in a specific format to the individual. This improves general staff awareness and knowledge and ensures each staff member directs their work and effort in a way consistent with overall business needs. So what essentially is being spoken about here is how providing feedback allows individuals to focus. So rather than write that really nice, really good paragraph that truly and fully explains the point, instead simply write, individually focused feedback can be provided to focus their work on personal and business goals. Essentially, this is pretty much the same thing. It's not as comprehensive, so it may not gain you the full mark. You may gain a half mark for it, but at the same time, that is so much quicker and easier to write. And let's do it for an even longer paragraph now. So appraisals also provide a forum for staff members to communicate with managers and discuss concerns, expectations, comments on other staff members, future career direction, and so on. Having this forum facilitates motivation for staff while also giving managers a view of wider issues affecting their staff, allowing them to resolve any issues and potentially improving staff performance. This could help overcome some of the performance problems identified by Bob Smith in his recent staff analysis report. So again, what is this paragraph saying? Essentially, it is saying that by being able to provide feedback to managers, staff feel motivated, they think that their issues are being heard, and also the company can take those issues and work on ways to solve them. So again, how would we write this very quickly? Staff provide feedback to managers, which facilitates motivation and allows issues to be aired and resolved. Again, essentially saying the same thing, but it is written in a far more concise manner. Again, may not get you the full mark because it is underdeveloped. There are some whys to this point, as in why does it facilitate feedback? Why does it allow issues to be aired? So it may not gain you the full mark, but it gets something down. It gets something on the paper, gets you something from the marker. So in summary, when you are using a one-line bullet point, put the point down, explain it, and put a little bit of extra information there just to add value, just to ensure that you are going to get something from the point. And you will get fewer marks for each point because they aren't as comprehensive, because they aren't as well explained, but you may be able to write plenty of these very short one-line bullet points more quickly than you would be able to write full paragraphs. And tip number 8, make the easy, obvious points first. Don't focus on the complex points. Remember that if you are writing a paragraph of information for a particular point that's very, very difficult, you might get a mark for it. If you're writing a paragraph of information for a point that's very, very easy, you're going to get a mark for it. So why would you spend too much time focusing on those complex points when ultimately you're going to get just as many marks from analyzing the easy points? So, for example, if you've got a question relating to the benefits of outsourcing, make the really obvious points first. The availability of resources, the opportunity to use their expertise. These are the very simple, almost textbook answers, textbook advantages to outsourcing, but if you explain them well, they're going to get you a mark. Now, if you talk about something that's far more obscure, something that's far more in-depth and involved, and links back to lots of bits of information within the pre-scene that indicates they may benefit from outsourcing, in an ideal world, you'd make that point. But if that point is going to take you twice as long, 3 times as long to explain, then simply saying it allows us to free up use of our resources and to take advantage of their expertise, then make those easy, obvious points first. You're probably taught in your objective test exams to go through the 60 questions first, answer the ones you could answer straight away, and flag the ones you couldn't answer. And then go back and answer the flagged ones. And this stops you from getting into a situation where you're answering one question after another, you get to the end of your time and you've got 10 questions left, so you just click a random answer for each one. Now, within those 10 questions, there would have been questions that you would definitely have got a mark for, that you would have definitely known the answer to if you just had 30 seconds to read the question. So by making the easy, obvious points first, you maximize your chances of getting as many marks as possible because you're getting the marks that you definitely know you can get straight away. Then you are going back and spending time working on the ones that you're not so sure about. And it stops you from being in a situation where you are forced to end early without getting those marks that you definitely could have got if you had just had a little bit of time to work on them. And so take that same principle and apply it to the case study exam.